Joining us now is Ty Cobb, former White House attorney in the first Trump administration. It's good to see you. Look, all of us knew that Ms. Halligan is not someone who is experienced, not at all experienced in these kinds of court cases. Nevertheless, what do you make of this latest reporting?
It's shocking. You couldn't find a high school stock boy at Home Depot who could have handled this more ineptly than Lindsay Halligan did. Taking an indictment that the grand jury never saw, having the foreman sign it, and then presenting it to a judge, that's the height of ineptitude and misconduct.
So when you say misconduct, let's talk about the implications for James Comey, because is it a procedural misstep that can be corrected, or is this denying a defendant due process?
It's both, but I think the interesting thing about this development is that there is no indictment, as Michael Dreeben, who is one of the country's most skilled advocates, has 100 Supreme Court arguments, made plain in court that there is no indictment. If only the foreman and some grand juror who was hanging out in the courtroom saw it, that's two. A quorum is 12. You need a quorum to return an indictment. So the indictment that was presented and that they've been proceeding on really is a nullity. And that's potentially procedurally critical here, because typically if an indictment is dismissed, the government has 6 months to represent, notwithstanding the expiration of the statute of limitations. This is an indictment, though, that doesn't really have to be dismissed. It doesn't really exist. It was never properly returned. So I think what we heard today, shocking, never occurred before in American jurisprudence. I think it will be dispositive. But on the other hand, there's so many dispositive issues here, including her illegal appointment.
Well, I do want to ask you about that. You've said that you think both Halligan and Attorney General Bondi could be disbarred over this case against Comey, and that was before we learned what happened today in court. It also raises questions for me that if you're going to use Lindsay Halligan in this manner, the fact that she has no experience, is anyone overseeing that work to make sure that problems don't arise? But what do you think now?
Well, I do think that both Halligan and Bondi should be disbarred. Bondi has twice submitted affirmations to this court about the propriety of Lindsay Halligan's grand jury presentation. She knew this. There's no way she could not have known this, and that's just means that she lied, or that she's equally incompetent, but more likely that she lied.
So let's talk about what happens now. Could this be brought back before a full grand jury? And we're back at the point where James Comey then is looking to get the case dismissed on the grounds of vindictive and selective prosecution.
So that hasn't been dismissed yet, or thrown out, or the nullity been recognized. I do think if the ruling is that there is no indictment, there's no indictment to dismiss. Only if the indictment is dismissed would the 6-month rule for representation come into play. So what happened today is very significant in that regard legally. But yes, Comey has, the misconduct issues, the miscarriage of justice issues, the denial of due process issues, the vindictiveness issues. This case is dead. This case is never going to get to trial. And Comey will, never be held accountable as the government has desired and as the president ordered Bondi to see to.
Apart from James Comey, there is this lingering question about the future of Lindsay Halligan. Along with New York Attorney General Letitia James, Comey is separately arguing had been separately arguing to disqualify her as the lead prosecutor in their cases, calling into question the lawfulness of her appointment in the first place. Are there, do you think, convincing arguments in that effort?
Oh, yes. I mean, the statute's very clear. The Attorney General and the President had 120 days worth of interim U.S. attorneys to appoint before the rule went to the district court. They denied the district court that rule, tried to circumvent it by appointing Halligan. They did so ineffectively and in a way that is prohibited by the law. I think that decision will definitely go against Halligan.
And as someone who worked in the Trump administration, I also want to ask you about the Epstein files, if I can, which
Sure.
before a last minute about face, right? Donald Trump had said that this was a hoax. He's been fighting to make sure that the Epstein files never see the light of day. The courts have always been a weapon for him to delay, right? In his private life, and certainly we've seen it in his political life now, that he seems poised to sign for the release of them. What is your expectation in terms of how he may operate or see this, as both the most members of Congress and certainly the survivors want the full transcripts, the full files released?
So, Chris, that's a great question. It's so complicated and so layered. It's very hard to do it in a soundbite. But simply put, Trump has no intention of releasing any documents. He and Bondi will scheme and prevent the release. In my view, I don't think we'll see any meaningful or consequential documents come out as to this, based on Trump's order to her to prosecute Democrats, not Republicans. There is an ongoing investigation. I'm sure she'll try to use that, and the statute itself provides a loophole for her in that regard. And Trump's reversal on this was just a canard. I mean, it's not sincere or genuine. He could have released the documents himself if he actually wanted them released without legislation, and he did so only because psychologically he has to be on the winning side. He can't abide being on the losing side. Couldn't have abided the repudiation that 100 Republicans or more were about to provide in voting with the Democrats to release the files. So I don't think anybody should expect to see any documents anytime soon. And contrary to Bondi's lies this morning, there is no new information. The government has all this information. Remember, Bondi said it was all on her desk and that she'd reviewed every wisp of it, and actually went on the record to say that there were no more cases that could be brought against anybody. And that was pretty definitive, and I'm sure that's the case. So whatever's happening now is...
America, the isolated. There was a time when America could make one phone call and half the world would listen. That era feels distant now. Under Trump, the United States isn't leading the orchestra anymore. It's playing solo, louder and more off-key than ever. What he calls strength, the world reads as desperation. India is frustrated by his tariffs. Europe is exhausted by his unpredictability. Latin America is resisting his bullying. Even traditional allies like Australia are watching every handshake twice. Trump has managed to turn a partnership into suspicion. He calls it independence, others call it isolation. The truth is, power doesn't vanish overnight. It fades as trust erodes. For decades, America's greatest weapon wasn't its army, but its reliability. Allies could depend on Washington's word, and markets could depend on its stability. Now, every tweet and threat shakes that faith. Trump treats diplomacy like a boxing match. There has to be a winner and a loser. But in geopolitics, that thinking breaks everything. Nations stop cooperating out of fear and start planning for life after you. That's exactly what's happening. India is drawing closer to Russia and Iran despite the pressure. Europe is investing in defense systems that don't depend on the U.S. umbrella. African and Asian nations are exploring new financial alliances with China and the BRICS bloc. The more Trump shouts, "America first," the more the world quietly answers, "Then go ahead alone." Even his wins come wrapped in unease. Isolation isn't just a diplomatic problem, it's a psychological one. Once a nation starts believing it's surrounded by enemies, it starts acting like one. Every criticism feels like sabotage, every question like betrayal. Trump's rhetoric feeds that paranoia, a story where only he sees the truth and the rest of the world conspires against him. The result? The United States is more divided abroad than ever. The American brand, once synonymous with opportunity, now carries the weight of unpredictability. Investors hesitate. Students rethink visas. Allies explore alternatives. The world isn't anti-American, it's anti-instability. And under Trump, instability is the only constant. Empires rarely fall with a bang. They fade through arrogance. America's decline won't come from defeat in war, but from self-inflicted solitude. Trump wanted to make America feared again. He succeeded, but fear is a poor substitute for respect, and isolation is a terrible definition of greatness.